everyone, John Monroe here to add my contribution to thinking about bringing Doughnut Economics off the page. And I'm delighted to be part of this conversation at the invitation of my friends at Civic Square here in Ladywood. Anyone who lives in the neighborhood here will probably instantly know where I am, walking along the canals here. And so I wanted to talk a little bit in this contribution to one of the projects that I'm working on that might be connected to this idea of bringing the Doughnut Economics ideas off the page. There's three projects I've been working on really that kind of intersect with discussions of Doughnut Economics that I was having in the reading group led by Charlotte Bailey that I was part of. And one of those was a walk that I wanted to go on, which I ended up doing in the spring in Los Angeles, something I'd wanted to do for a long time, which was a walk of Sunset Boulevard. And it was interesting because I'd wanted to do that for a long time, but what I didn't know is that my walk was going to be quite informed by thinking about Doughnut Economics and the conversations we've been having in our group as I was going. So that was a nice experience, and I was able to check that box of getting that walk completed, which was a lot of fun. Secondly, I've been working on some road safety stuff, also with Civic Square, which has been really wonderful. And part of that has been bringing Tom Flood, a kind of expert on some of these questions, to town to engage in a series of panels and workshops on this topic of road safety, car culture, the relationship between cars and other forms of mobility through our neighborhood, through our city, through cities in general, and we can scale up from there. So that's been another interesting conversation around mobility at the neighborhood level, and always thinking about scaling that up to larger scales. The third project I've been working on, the one I really want to talk about here, is this Imperialism Syllabus, which is a project I've been working on with a friend and colleague, Radhika Natarajan, who teaches at Reed College in Portland, Oregon in the United States. And this is something that the two of us put together for this website, Public Books. And the syllabus idea it's just sort of a way of organizing some ideas to speak to a particular topic. And the topic we wanted to speak to was imperialism. And so what we wanted to do with this was to think about the many ways that the history of imperialism and the ongoing manifestations of empire shape our world in really profound ways. And so this is something that we've been working on. We were working on it anyways. We had put the online version of this out in 2021. And now Radhika and I are working on this as a book. And so it's just interesting to think about the intersections between Doughnut Economics and empire, because this is also something that came up in our reading group conversations sort of over and over again. And it's a way of really thinking about that generative kind of idea that Civic Square has been asking us to engage in, which is thinking about the neighborhood and thinking about how we can bring about positive change at the neighborhood level. But of course, it's never limited to that. The neighborhood is embedded in some wider context. And so it's always incumbent upon us to think about these larger scales when we're thinking about things in Ladywood or whatever neighborhood we might be in. So the Imperialism Syllabus is something that can hopefully contribute to that conversation in terms of, mostly in terms of the wider context. But then we can, in turn, bring that back to thinking about what that wider context looks like at the neighborhood level as well. So it works both ways, from the neighborhood up and from the macro kind of down to the local scale. Okay, so what I wanted to do then was a little bit more specifically, just talk a little bit briefly through the themes that we're talking about in the Imperialism Syllabus to give it a little bit more of a concrete flavor in terms of what we're doing, and ways that then we might want to think about connections between the Doughnut idea, between the work of Civic Square, and between this larger kind of idea of the ways that imperialism continues to shape our world. So let's see, I made a couple of notes here. Right, so just in terms of a few of the themes that we're talking about in the syllabus. So we've got The first section talks about imperialism after 1492, because what we're talking about here is those forms of modern empire that have really influenced the contemporary moment. You know, there's the Roman Empire, there are other ancient articulations of imperialism. That's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the last 5 centuries, and really primarily because this is the era in which the structures that form the 21st century world really come into being and really become entrenched. So 2 of the foundational structures that we then turn to are settler colonialism and slavery. Settler colonialism, many of us around kind of Civic Square circles will have already been giving a lot of thought to this in terms of the Braiding Sweetgrass book and Robin Kimmerer's discussions of indigenous thought and science. And of course that's happening in the context of that particular form of colonialism where the invaders come to stay in places like Canada, where I'm from. Slavery, of course, is also a foundational and very much ongoing structuring force in world history. And the racial forms of anti-Black racism that accompanied slavery and their impacts very much on the world today is something that we're thinking about there in terms of slavery as obviously a fundamental racial and racist practice of the past, and thinking about its impacts, particularly through anti-Black racism on the present. So settler colonialism and racial slavery are 2 really foundational kinds of structuring forces that we're talking about here. Beyond those, we're talking about imperial violence, the ways that empire is always, as Frantz Fanon famously wrote about, an imperial, a violent form of imperial rule, the ways that where empire exists, violence is never far away. We're also talking about the economy, very closely related here to Doughnut Economics, about how empire structures the economy, about how empire structures a racial economy, about how empire, through liberal individualism and ideas of growth, limitless growth for the white man with property, sort of posit a certain form of economic thought that has really come to dominate a lot of the ways of how economics is thought about in a kind of traditional dominant form in today's world, as we see very much with the contemporary Tory government of Liz Truss. Beyond that, culture is another important topic that we'll be looking at. Hi. In the syllabus, and we're thinking here about the ways that imperialism has denigrated the cultures that over which it has ruled, or attempted to. But we're also thinking about contemporary forms of cultural hierarchy, and even here, coming back to the road safety issue, car culture is part of what we're talking about here. Thinking about how infrastructure is sort of representative of forms of domination, of power, and of kind of embedded hierarchies through culture. So, I mean, here I am today walking along the canal, and what is this canal other than primarily in its origins? Now it's a nice place to do some fishing and go for a walk. But of course, this is itself imperial infrastructure that connected the products of empire and the violent weapons of empire, the guns that were made in this part of the world, to the wider set of colonies that the British Empire ruled over. So if we think about that, that's not a kind of logic of infrastructure that only exists in the past. It also applies to our roads and the ways that those who own the private property of cars can have a certain right to public space that those who do not own such a piece of property might have. So culture then is a really key aspect of empire, and we're connecting that up as another one of our themes. We're thinking about how empire shapes relations within the metropole. So the ways that empire is out there, as it were, in the colonies, but of course that had a very shaping and kind of fundamental impact on the politics and culture of this country, as well as other imperial metropoles as well. We're thinking too about citizenship, always a key aspect of how people and populations are organized in an imperial context. And we're thinking about how citizenship, again today, think deportations, that or think of citizenship questions within the United States, etc. These come out of imperial histories, and again, they're not gone. It's not a legacy of empire. It is empire and imperial structuring in our present. So this is another theme that we're thinking about. A couple of other kind of big 20th century topics that loom large in the 21st that we're also looking at is the relationship between fascism and imperialism, and the relationship between Cold War and imperialism. So for fascism, we're thinking about, again, those forms of a hierarchical structure, often an explicitly racial hierarchical structure, that make fascism and imperialism close cousins in terms of the ideological forms of rule that they represent. So we're looking at that and thinking about that again. What impact does that have on today's world when fascism, as we know, is once again a very real threat in multiple sites around the world? The Cold War is a bit of a different story. It's over, but there's a way in which the Cold War played a really important role in sort of being something of a distraction from empire, of positing this rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, capitalism versus communism, as somehow a separate story from the story of empire and decolonization. And we want to bring those a little more closely into conversation. Finally, we'll be looking at formal decolonization, the process, the hugely important process by which colonies became countries, and the ways in which the hopes and promises that attended that were, in some cases, realized to some degree, and given the ongoing inequalities, global north versus global south, the ways in which those hopes were dashed as well. So I'm hoping that this is something that can contribute to this conversation. We'll see how this is going to take us a while to work on this as a book. We're very interested throughout the chapters in the kind of climate context for all of this as well, which is another thing that we'll be thinking about. So I'm looking really forward to seeing all of the other contributions that people will be making to this latest, again, wonderful sort of way that Civic Square is bringing us together for conversation. And we live in difficult times. Again, the disaster that is Tory rule in this country is one very pressing example at the moment. But it's by collective thinking, it's by collective work on coming up with the solutions to the problems that we face, that I think we will be able to get somewhere together. So I'm looking really forward to the conversations and the other contributions to this larger conversation that we're going to see in late October of 2022. Okay, see you then. Bye.